Hello everyone, Sigs here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the Mechanical Menagerie encounter from the Gnomeregan Raid in Phase 2 of the World of Warcraft Classic Season of Discovery from a healing mage point of view. I will talk a little bit about the fight, the boss mechanics, as well as some tips on healing mage. Now, I certainly don't play perfectly here, far from it in fact. I am a 4x cutting edge raid leader from the retail version of World of Warcraft, so I do know a thing or two about a thing or two, but I am also old and washed up, so I certainly wouldn't take anything that I say as gospel. With all that being said, here is a look at the talents and the runes that I am running, and there will also be a link to logs in the description if you'd like to see a more detailed healing breakdown. So getting into the actual fight here, you may have noticed that I already pre-cast regeneration on all of the tanks and then sat down to drink. This is so that we can start the fight with some healing beacons already out and be able to keep the tanks topped up as they pull without having to spend mana on beacons. The only thing is you're going to want to be able to sit down with enough time to actually let your mana come back up, and you can also get clear casting procs doing this to conserve even more mana. But going into the actual fight, we're just going to start off doing some damage, trying to burn through our mana early, because at this point I don't really know how long the fight is going to be, and I certainly don't want to end the fight with extra mana. I'd rather have spent that on doing damage or healing. Of course, we don't want to go out of mana either, but we'll talk about that later. So you'll see that little pink-purple parentheses icon pop up in the middle of the screen sometimes. That's my missile barrage proc. I pretty much want to spend those whenever I get them so that we're not overcapping on procs, and then we pretty much want to maintain mass regeneration on as many targets as possible at all times. That is our primary source of healing, and then beyond that we're just doing our basic rotation of doing arcane blast to build stacks and then spending it on arcane missiles whenever we get a proc to do healing on our beacon targets. The goal of this fight is to defeat all 4 bosses at right around the same time, otherwise they resurrect. So we had the casters on the sheep because the sheep does AoE damage, so melee don't want to be near it. And what you'll see me do here is click this big red button. There's one of them on each of the pillars around the room, and what it'll do is give you 20% mana at the cost of 30% health, and then it has a 30-second cooldown until you can hit it again. So you'll want to hit it early as soon as you're missing 20% of your mana, and then every 30 seconds again after that. Besides the sheep, we just try to keep all 3 of the other enemies together for cleave. Now the dragon does a breath, which I didn't see here, so I blinked out of the way thankfully. It puts a pretty nasty dot on you, so that should be avoided at all costs. Beyond that, the chicken does lay this explosive egg, which should be DPS down, otherwise it will explode and do raid-wide damage, and there is also this yellow barrier that comes out that you should pull the bosses out of, otherwise they take reduced damage. And the squirrel will also occasionally cast volley, which can interrupt your spell casting as well as deal damage to random raid members. It can be interrupted, so you should try to do that as much as possible. And lastly, the bosses will periodically become overheated, which means they will take 25% additional damage. However, they will also pulse AoE damage to anyone in melee range, so melee should move out when that happens and let the range DPS get extra damage in that way. But now we'll talk a bit about the healing mage rotation. So you'll see here I hit this again to get some mana back and then spend the missile barrage proc for some healing. Now we're doing mass regeneration as we dodge the breath, and we have a clear casting proc, so we're going to want to use that generally on arcane missiles if possible, but here we use it on a mass regeneration, which is fine because we needed beacons. Here I go right into an arcane missiles. I'm about to evocate, so I'm just trying to dump as much mana as possible actually. Usually this is not what you would do. We get another proc for a free missiles, so we just spend that real quick, and then we evocate. Now I'm making sure I'm not in the breath here, hoping my evocate can finish. I should cancel it now, I let it go a little long, but then we need to reapply our beacons, and we're going into arcane blast. We get a proc, so we're going to want to spend that proc. But first we're going to put out more beacons because the tank is getting low, and we also want this missiles to heal as many targets as possible. Now we're making sure we're not in the breath, and really we should be applying more beacons here. That tank, the warrior, is getting kind of low, so going up to 3 stacks and then dumping into an arcane missiles here without beacons out is not a great thing to do. I really should have mass regen first, or at least got a beacon on the tank with a regular regeneration. But anyway, we go back into it. We try to mass regen here. You can see it does not hit all 5 targets. Positioning and who you target with mass beacon is very important as it only hits the players within 30 yards, so if players are all spread out like this, you're not going to get good value for it if it doesn't apply all the beacons. But anyway, we're refreshing the beacons on the tanks here. Going back to spamming, we get a proc, so we're probably going to want to just dump that at 2 stacks, which, yep, we do. And at this point, we're just trying to keep all of the adds even, all of the various bosses even on health, so we can defeat them all at the same time. Now we have a breath coming, so we want to get out of the way of that. We're going to click the button to get that extra 20% mana. and top ourselves up. Just doing a single regen on the tank because I'm worried that the mass regeneration is going to hit all 5 targets again, and it's really just the tanks that I'm worried about. So I got stunned by the sheep because I was too close, so I blink away here to get out of the stun, but then same deal here, just get a beacon on him with a regeneration, get over here, try to get more DPS on the dragon since nobody else is really hitting him. Go for Arcane Blast, we get a proc, so we just spend it at 2. That's going to be pretty solid healing without wasting a lot of extra mana. Now we'll do a mass regen. We see that everybody's grouped up, and we have a clear casting proc, so we can just spend that on an arcane missiles right away. It's usually a pretty good bet. And now the bosses are all pretty low, so you can see the first one's starting to self-repair, so we have to finish off the other ones before he repairs, and as long as we defeat them all within, I think it's a 25-second window, then there you go. You finish the boss, and you get your loot. So I don't know if I did a great job explaining that. I'm not even really sure what I was trying to do with this video. I just figured I should say something instead of just throwing up like raw footage. But I wasn't sure if I should really do like an in-depth breakdown of the healing mage rotation or more about the base mechanics of the fight. But seeing as it's the first week of this raid, essentially it's only the second time that people would have had a chance to do this raid. I figure people probably are curious about what the actual boss mechanics are, as well as kind of healing mage stuff. So I try to do a little bit of both. Hopefully you found that at least a little bit valuable. One of the other things that I didn't mention is the cooldowns, so Presence of Mind and Arcane Power. Now, it's a 3-minute cooldown. If the fight's going to be longer than 3 minutes, you want to just use it on pull just to get like some free damage in to speed up the fight a little bit, and then you'll get a second use of it towards the end of the fight. That's how you can, kind of pad the meters to get the best parse possible if that's what you care about. Otherwise, if you're only going to get one use of it, you should just save it for a time when you need a bunch of extra healing, like kind of an oh shoot button. If someone gets really low, you can just pop both cooldowns, throw out an instant cast Arcane Blast, and it should heal all of your beacon targets for quite a lot. I think that's what I ended up doing with it when the tank got a little bit lower earlier in the fight, and I was talking about something else, so I didn't mention it. But beyond that, yeah, that's the fight. The rule of thumb is just keep your mana above the boss's health, especially if you don't know roughly how long the fight is going to be. As long as your mana is above the boss's health, then you're not going to run out before the fight ends, and you're not going to have a bunch of extra mana at the end of the fight that you should have spent doing extra damage or healing if you keep your mana percentage just slightly above the boss's health percentage. Just keep in mind that you do also have Evocate. So whenever you get low the first time, you can just Evocate. I tend to just dump my mana a little bit more at the start of a fight, going up to like 4 stacks of Arcane Blast, trying to get like an empowered Arcane Missiles off for like a bunch of extra damage, and then use all that extra healing from that extra damage to then kind of coast and then figure out how long the fight is going to be, and then I can just Evocate and conserve mana from that point if needed. But anyways, hopefully you found some of that useful. If nothing else, you got to kind of see the fight and see it from a healing mage point of view. Again, not the best player here. I did get a 90 parse, which is like decent. I guess I was pulling my own weight. I did do more healing than the other healers. However, certainly not as much healing as I could have done. So that's all for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed and found it useful in some way. And stay tuned for hopefully some more and better videos like this going forward. But that's all for now. Take care. Have a good one. Peace.